What is up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of the Barry and Mack Show, where myself, Barry, personal trainer and athletic development coach based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and former Sooner wide receiver and 2000 national championship winner, Damian Mackey, are going to discuss anything and everything about the Sooners, past, present, and of course the future leading up into the 2022 season, where first year head coach Brent Venables hopes to get this team back to where it was before. Some podcasts won't talk X's and O's. Well, Damian Mackey is going to talk X's and O's. Some podcasts do just a cursory glance at the workouts. We're going to talk about sports science, take a look at some of the workouts, analyze what players are saying, and really have a discussion and talk with someone who was there in the trenches back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and saw it from a first-hand point of view. This podcast is what we would like to call a passion project because we are passionate about the Oklahoma Sooners. Me as a fan, Damian Mackey as a former player, and we hope that you enjoy listening and supporting this podcast as much as we are going to enjoy bringing it to you each and every week. And if you haven't already, make sure you go follow us on Instagram at The Barry and Mack Show, as well as our individual pages at BWise Fitness, at BWISE Fitness, and at Dame That Dude. And without further ado, I give you guys the Barry and Mack Show. And the other namesake on the title is the guy that you're probably here for, and that's totally okay with me because I'm glad that he chose to take part in this, kind of working together and strategizing. Oklahoma Sooner, national champion, and all-around good dude, Mr. Damian Mackey.
What's going on, brother? Appreciate the kudos, man. I'm excited to get this thing off the ground. Let's have a conversation with the Sooner Nation and really dive into Sooner athletics, obviously primarily football. But let's just have a conversation and really get clear, get keen, and get a deeper understanding of what's going on with our team, the program, BV, obviously, coach. Hopefully you hear this. It'll be dope to have you hear this because you were my linebacker coach and punt team coach when I was a Sooner back in the day. But I'm excited, man. Get the show on the road.
All right, let's get it, man. So for the people who don't know, I'll give you a little bit of background here on myself. So born and raised in Oklahoma, and I kind of grew to love, 31 years old. I grew to love the Sooners at around that 1998 range,
There
right?
you go.
That's a lot of people. Like a lot of the people going to the games now, starting to buy season tickets. A lot of the fans, especially the younger fans, they were really introduced to OU football. You hear it all the time. Like, when did you start liking the team? Like, oh, around 98, 99. It's so common. And you were a part of that era. The OU obviously dominated in the 70s, dominated in the 80s. And then the 90s were a little bit different. I mean, kind of the long and the short on why you came to OU. And then just kind of that transition period from, 97, 98, and then obviously on into the new millennium.
First things first, shout out to you, class of 98, baby. So you came along around the year that we all were recruited to OU. Special shout out to John Blake, God rest his soul. Yeah, but guys, born and raised California. Roy Williams and myself were the dynamic duo in the class of 98 recruiting class out of here in Northern California in the Oakland and Bay Area. Crazy story, guys, is initially when OU recruited us, you would have thought they were recruiting Roy. They recruited me initially. And so OU's recruiting me. By the way, not going to OU, just FYI, some of you guys know the story, but I was a 4.0 student. I was committed to Stanford. I was looking at USC. They were trying to get me to play offense. I liked defense better. So I was going to Stanford to play a DB position. and tore my stinking ACL in the state championship game against De La Salle High School.
Ooh.
True story. Tear
Mm.
my ACL in the third quarter. Tear my ACL. By the way, it's a dog fight. We're losing like 13-9. This is when De La Salle was going on. You may not know this, it's before your time, Barry, but they were on like a 160 game win streak. It was the longest win streak in America. It was over 11 seasons. They hadn't lost a game. And we're playing them in our backyard. They're from NorCal too, so they're 30 minutes from where we live. And we end up losing that game. I end up tearing my ACL, my MCL, my PCL. There probably are 25 D1 coaches in the stands. DJ Williams, who went on to play for University of Miami, was on the field. Roy and myself were on the field. Our middle linebacker went to New Mexico. Our left tackle went to BYU. The running back was a year under us, but he went to Montana State, and then De La Salle had 5 or 6 guys who were going D1 as well. So power packed game. We lose. And not only do we lose the game, I lose my scholarship. So literally that night, the D coordinator from Stanford essentially calls my mom and says, "Hey, Damian should go to a prep school." Bro, I have a 4.0. I got offered. By the way, I was offered by Texas, by Nebraska, by SC. But I committed to Stanford early, and that was where I wanted to go. I wanted to stay home and get the degree there. So at that point, USC, Fresno State, Hawaii, and Oklahoma stayed in the picture. Roy's aunt, crazy story, Barry. Roy's
Yeah.
aunt is the head of the cafeteria, the athletic cafeteria, even like the old Jefferson. I think they're tearing the Jefferson Hall down now, but she was the head chef. And so, she's from the Bay Area, well, but she had to move to Oklahoma. And she's like, "Wait a minute, you guys are recruiting Damian. Why aren't you recruiting my nephew?" This is a conversation she's having with John Blake. And John Blake was like, "Who's your nephew?" And she's like, "My nephew is Roy Williams." Well, I was a regional athlete. I was being recruited regionally. I was being recruited by all the Ivy League schools, stuff like that. I wasn't getting recruited by Michigan. I wasn't getting recruited by Miami, but those were big time programs at the time. Roy was. I wasn't a Gatorade All-American. Roy was, right? And so she shows a picture like, "This is my nephew." And immediately they offer Roy. And I literally hop on a plane it's less than 10 days out of surgery after my injury. And we're on a plane to Oklahoma for our visit. I hated it. Roy loved it. I had never experienced anything below 30 degrees. It was like
Oh,
-10. It's like
man.
-10. But the beauty about that all is Curtis Fagan was there, Andre Woolfolk was there, Brandon Pryor was there, Trent Smith was there, Rocky Kalmus was there, Mike Skinner was there, Will Barty was there. Like literally 10 of the guys, I could name other guys too, were on that trip. It was like a huge weekend. And so they all committed on the trip. I didn't commit because I was like, I'm going to see USC first. Well, Roy commits. And so we're on the plane ride home, and he's like, "What'd you do?" And I said, man, I told him I need to think about it." He was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I told him I need to think about it." He said, "Bro, you got a bum wheel. They're going to take care of you." And I said, "Yeah, well, Mike Sherrard was the receiver coach, old 49er receiver. He was a receiver coach at SC at the time, and he had called and said they wanted me to go down to SC. I said, I want to check out SC first. Coach Blake wasn't having it. Coach Blake called me. We got home. Barry, it's 10 minutes after I got home, and Coach Blake's on the, "Hey, my mom is, hey, someone wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "Okay." And, "What's up, freak?" And I'm like, "Oh God, this is Coach Blake." So, "Hey, what's up, Coach? Hey, listen, man, I know you were a little overwhelmed while you were here, but wait, what I gotta do to get to Oklahoma? I gotta stay within the rules, but within the rules, what I gotta do?" I mean, he had that Barry Switzer, just that energy. And of course, Roy's on the phone too. And of course, Roy's mom is on the phone too. And come to find out, his mom and my mom had essentially gotten together without me knowing, and were like, they wanted me there because my mom went with me, obviously. And so
Ooh.
I committed. I committed over the phone. They sent me I forgot, the letter of intent. Yeah, they sent me a letter of intent. Man, and that's how we got to OU, man. It started out with them recruiting me initially, and then I tear my freaking leg up. And Roy's been recruited by everybody, Barry. Like everybody in America wants Roy. But pretty crazy experience. And that's how we got to OU. We get to OU, we're 5-6 our freshman year. Sheesh, you know what though? Talent on that team. Oh my God, the amount of talent that was on that team was ridiculous.
Yeah. But that's so why do you think I kind of want to circle back. What were your impressions of John Blake just as a coach?
John, and again, he's no longer with us, but
Sure.
he played the position of father. And I think one of the
Mm,
reasons he was such a good recruiter is he knew how to go into the homes of, I grew up in a single parent home. Roy grew up with both his mom and dad, but I grew up with just my mom. I've never lived with my dad. And Coach Blake had a really keen attribute of connecting and really providing a layer of like, yo, you're gonna have support. And so when I got to OU, Coach Blake did a phenomenal job of making sure we had like support in a sense of like where we're gonna live, and he made sure the Pell Grants and things are taken care of. And listen, we ate white cloth. I'll tell you a funny story here later, but like
yeah.
when we traveled, we ate steak, and I mean he treated us like the Cowboys. He was a D line
Sure.
coach in Dallas prior to coaching at OU, and he treated us like men. And to be honest with you, most of us weren't. And I think that was a gift and a curse because he gave us a lot of leeway. And on the football field, his style versus Bob's was night and day. Our strength and conditioning with Blair Prince, which by the way, Blair Prince is a solid guy, man. Hopefully he hears this too. I stay in contact with him, but Blair Prince and Jerry Schmidt are just night and day in their approach to athletic science and strength and conditioning. And so the whole program was just totally different, run by John Blake. He delegated to his assistants. He let them, some of them do extremely well, like Pittman, who's now the head coach at Arkansas, right? He was the O-line coach, stud. And then you got Joe Dickinson, who was the O coordinator. And yeah, I don't think he got another job after OU, if not maybe a couple right after the fact, but
Yeah,
not.
I don't think he did. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is interesting because what year was Rex Ryan on the staff?
Oh,
Or
Rex Ryan came into my house, man. Rex Ryan recruited me because I was
wow.
OU's recruit me on defense.
Oh,
So
they were recruiting you to defense.
I
Okay.
was an
Okay.
all-state D back, baby. I was a safety. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I was a
Wow.
safety. And so Rex Ryan and Joe Dickinson. So Joe Dickinson comes the first time, and I was not impressed. He comes to the school, pulls me out of class, whatever. The old style. This is like, you don't really get recruited in the 90s until like football season of your senior year. You get letters. I got letters my sophomore and junior year, but you don't really get like the coaches, like, now coaches are coming to see sophomores. It wasn't
Oh
like
yeah.
that when I
So
was coming
different.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
when I was coming out, I would see the coaches recruiting the upperclassmen, and I was excited to wait my turn. You started getting letters the end of your sophomore year, and then you started getting invited to camp. So I did the camp circuit and did really well in the camp circuit. And that's really how I got myself out there. And then my school at the time, we were a powerhouse. It was us and De La Salle and a couple of schools. But Rex Ryan shows up at Houseby, and I was like, I'm a fan. And he just had that cool, calm, collective attitude. He had the mullet, you know what I'm saying? He's got the mullet in the crib. He's
Yeah.
talking to my mother. It was awesome, man. I that sold me. But it was really after my knee injury. I lost probably Texas, Nebraska. I mean, it was 90% of the schools that were like, if anything changes, let me know. Literally, it was crickets. It was literally SC, Fresno State, Hawaii, and Oklahoma. And that's what it boiled down to after I got hurt.
Yeah. And it's so, I mean, it's kind of a cautionary tale. Like yours obviously, turned out for the good, but man, so many, like especially for athletes that will listen to this, there are so many stories where that doesn't pan out, which,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the reasons that you've seen this shift. I'd say it definitely in the past decade. Obviously with the NIL stuff too, there's another layer to everything, but you really see this ownership that even like younger athletes are taking with like how their approach is to picking a school, and holding schools accountable a little bit more. So back then, like, you don't really know what you don't know, like the internet, social media, none of that exists in this recruiting world at this time. Maybe there's like a handful of message board sites, but I mean, there's nothing of any substance. And you are really at almost the disposal of like what those coaches and programs want to do. And then of course you can decide to go the JUCO route, fork the money over for you to get the operation, do the rehab yourself, all those things. But like there's so many times where, man, that just does not pan out.
Every year. I was an educator 11 years, 4 years in the classroom, 7 years a principal. And every single year I saw a D1 caliber kid who was on the cusp, who it was an injury, or what it was a lot of times too, Barry, is it's transcripts. One class, they took a non-qualifying math course versus A through G course, or whatever. And it was just so interesting to see, like you said, the student athlete had such little power up until about, you're absolutely right, the end of my principal career. I stopped being a principal in 17. But at the end, 15, 16, 17 is when students started to, or the athletes started to have a lot more power in their own hands. And I'm all in on those guys exercising their ability to earn income, their ability to market themselves. Because let me tell you, if Roy and I could have run a camp, we could have run a camp in Oklahoma and got 200 kids. We could have run a camp in California and got 200 kids. And then we could have run a camp with all of our buddies that went D1 because we played since Pee Wee League. I mean, Kerry Murdoch, who, by the way, that's my boy, Kerry and James Hill. I used to do, there was a guy back in the day, Barry, check this out. There's a guy back in the days now, I think his name was Gary Mack. It's funny you said it. He had a message board. He was like an admin on a message board back in the day.
Okay.
And I'm in high school. I committed, and I spent a lot of time in the training room after committing because I'm rehabbing an ACL. And Roy caught wind of it first. Roy was like, "Yo, I found this Oklahoma message board. I don't even remember what it was called." He shows me how to get to it. I get to it. I essentially, I had no idea about OU, how they are just their fans. No idea. I just kind of went there. I was impressed when I got there. I saw all the All-Americans. I saw that they had national championships. I saw that they had a huge stadium. California, Stanford, and Cal didn't have stadiums like the OU stadium even back then. So that all impressed me, and I wanted to play in that type of platform. But I get on this message board, brother. I post, "Hey, my name is Damian Mackey. I'm excited to be coming there. I'm a kid from NorCal." When I tell you there were probably 500 responses. And so this guy DMs me on there. Essentially, it wasn't a DM back then, but he kind of like PM'd me, personal message. He's like, "Yo, are you really Damian Mackey?" And I was like, yeah. And so I get to OU and I started doing it once a week on Wednesday nights. And like, imagine if I used to do once a week on Wednesdays. I would just do like a Q&A session on his message board, and there'd be thousands of people on there asking thousands of questions. And I didn't even really for me, I wasn't even thinking about it from a business lens. I was just excited to communicate with the people, and he was moderating it. And one time, Kerry Murdoch, I told Kerry years ago when I started doing stuff for Rivals and being a part of their platform. I said, "Bro, Kerry, were you the guy?" He was like, "Yeah, man, you remember that?" And then of course he did a story with me on Sooners Illustrated soon thereafter. I believe Kerry ran the Sooners Illustrated stuff back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, dang, that's crazy. If we had access to that, what they have access to now in the late 90s, it would have been money all over the place, brother. It would have been crazy. It would have been crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll obviously, whether today or down the road, get into a lot of the NIL stuff, but I mean, the team that you guys were able to form, like, there's this idea that there wasn't talent on those 97, 98, even 99 teams. And, there were obviously the 98 recruiting class, very, very, very important. But there's this concept that like, it was a bunch of just ho-hum guys, walking out there, gosh, I hope I don't get beat up today. But the reality, when you look back at the amount of guys who either got drafted or just played even beyond, their talent level, right, at that time, guys like, Derek Strait, who ended up coming, and then of course Andre Woolfolk. Was he a part of the 98 class? Yeah. Okay. There was so much talent on that team, and I think that is so undersold when we look back at that team, that there was so much there that does not get the respect from history. At least I don't think so.
Agreed. There's a saying, it says, "To the victors go the spoils." And when you're losing, then people assume you're not very talented. And when I got to OU, to be very frank, I don't think we were very talented. My redshirt season, or maybe had the depth of talent along the offensive line. There was not a lot of talented depth along the offensive line, which is why we struggled running Joe Dickinson's option, and then we kind of went to a power football kind of a scheme later on that season.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had this conversation for years. True story. Roy goes to the league in 01. Jeremy Shockey's last year at University of Miami is 02. And when I tell you, we would spend a lot of time in Miami because that's where we like to hang out. That's where Roy liked to hang out when he first went to the NFL. We'd see Shockey and we'd see all those guys. Of course, we won it in 2000. They won it in 01. Of course, they beat Florida State, but had lost to UW. We beat Florida State to win the game. And then the next year they beat the brakes off Nebraska. So they're talking all this smack. I said, man, let me tell you something, Shockey. Excuse my French, we would have beat the shit out of you guys. And I said, and by the way, I happen to know you wanted to go to Oklahoma as a kid growing up in Ada, and we took Trent Smith. And so, it was one of those deals. Well, by the way, it was all fun. I mean,
sure.
Shockey talks shit with the best of them. He's a professional, or at least back then he was a professional at it. But to your point, I did this analysis. God, I forgot. Oh, it was someone on the Rivals board. The 2000 Oklahoma national championship team had more national champions and more national award winners than the 2001 Miami team.
Wow.
And the perception is the 2000, by the way, that's Ed Reed, that's Shockey, that's K. K2 wasn't playing on that team, but I think he was a pup on that team. That's Ken Dorsey, that's Bryant McKinney. That's, they had guys that, by the way, they had Andre Carter at the receiver position. But people forget that we had Roy Williams, Thorpe winner. We had Derek Strait, Thorpe winner. Yeah. We had J.T. Thatcher, All-American. We had Rocky Kalmus, Buckus winner. We had Teddy Lehman, Buckus winner. And we had Torrance Marshall, All-American. Like, don't sleep and act like, we had one guy. Josh Heupel won the Walter Camp. And, of course, Winky had beat him up by the Heisman by one of the slimmest margins in the Heisman's history. But at that time, Andre Woolfolk's a receiver, but he goes on to be a first-round draft pick as a defensive back. Quentin Griffin was All-American. I mean, so you go back and forth. By the way, I didn't know this, but Frank Romero got All-American in one publication. I went and looked it up because we were doing the research. So it's like, perception's reality. The reality is for the 4 years prior, Miami was building up a reputation of being back, and Oklahoma went from 5-6, 7-4 to 13-0 and beating everybody's behind. And we didn't have very many household names, but go back and look at that team. Go look at 2000 versus 2001. We have more All-Americans or national award winners than the 2001 Miami Hurricanes team. And by the way, that's not my opinion. That's just the facts.
Just the facts. Yeah. And then when you look back, like how many times do you see some random thing on ESPN or on Bleacher, like ranking the past, best teams of the past 20 years. And they put that Miami team it's always, I would say, perennially top 5.
For sure.
Always.
Sure.
And then OU, they'll have them somewhere around like 10 to 15. The USC teams get a lot of love. The Miami teams get a lot of love.
Yep.
Obviously some of the Alabama teams, of course, get a lot of love. It's that team, like defensively, some of the defense that you guys were playing towards the end of that year, especially, what it culminated in, against Florida State, was elite level stuff. I mean, and just making, and I think this is what we haven't necessarily seen from the teams of late that you were able to get back then. Was I feel like the teams of the past 6 or 7 years, when there was a big play needed in a game, it generally had to come from the offense.
100%.
But when you look back at those teams, 2000, 2001, 02, on up till about probably 04, 05, how often was something needed in a game, an interception, a fumble recovery? And it wasn't this whole, ball's loose, happens to fall in my hand. Guys were going out there with the thought of like, I'm going to take this win from you.
100%. Brodney Poole, pick 6. Tommy Harris, strip sack and forced fumble, right? Dusty Dvorak, Lance Mitchell meets Cedric Benson in a hole and form tackles his ass and he fumbles the football and boom, now the route is on. Like that was the actual moniker back then. There would be some games. Listen, we struggled the second half of the season. Josh had a golf ball sized burst sack on his elbow. I mean, his elbow was huge. Couldn't throw the ball 30 yards. Like Nate Hibble and Jason White would do like 50 to 60% of the throws in practice because Josh just couldn't throw the ball. And so second half of the year, we it took away our ability to test teams defense on deep. We had to depend on the defense. And the A&M game, we scored 31 points, but man, how fun was it to watch by the way, they were cussing a storm. They had a kid by the name of Robert Ferguson, receiver out of Texas. He was a Texas kid, and he's at A&M, and he destroyed us for 3 quarters. And then in the fourth quarter, Mike and BV got it figured out, and they shut him down. But you're right, man. I got front row seats to watch it. Listen, a defense where literally, there's Roy Williams and JT Thatcher at your safeties. Both of these guys All-Americans. You've got Derek Strait and Michael Thompson as your corners. If Mike doesn't get into a car accident, he's a first round. He and Andre Woolfolk are carbon copies of each other, literally. Ante Jones is your nickelback. All right. Then you got Rocky Kalmus and Torrance Marshall. We got Jimmy Wilkerson, who played 10 years in the league for the Chiefs and a couple other teams on one end. And then we had, our other D linemen were just studs. We had a guy by the name Jeremy Wilson, guest stud. Barry Holloman played a couple years in the NFL. Like these are just Oklahoma blue collar. They had the size. They had the heart. They probably weren't running a 4.640 at 290, but they're running a 4.85, and they were Schmitty built. And we'll talk about Schmitty another day. But going through what Schmitty puts you through in the summertime and in the off season, these guys were listen. There wasn't no Mickey Mouse team, man. It wasn't. And then on offense, you got Josh Heupel, who was Baker before Baker, right? If social, well, not so much eccentric, but leadership. Josh was a leader, like flat out. Josh would be like, Mackie, that corner sucked. Do it again. And you know what I would say? Got you. Just because he earned that respect, we practice hours and hours and hours over and beyond whatever the schedule was, whatever, the expectations of the coaches were, because we had that leadership from Josh Heupel, Jay Hype. And so I always, when those opinions come out, here's some things that people can't dispute. Number one, we were in the toughest conference in America in 2000. People talk about the SEC. The SEC was trash. By the way, Bama came to Oklahoma 01-02 and got the brakes beat off of them both times. We beat they behind in Norman. We beat they behind in Bama, right? So back then it's Florida and Tennessee. Georgia was an 8-4 team. Bama was a 7-5 team. The best teams in the SEC were Tennessee, who had gone off back-to-back championships with T. Martin and Peyton. Won one, lost one, and Florida. Florida was the Rydell Anthony, Ike Hilliard. They had Danny Cannell. They had Spurrier Sr. Yeah. Those guys were riding the wave of the SEC in the mid to late 90s. The Big 12 was it was as physical as it got. Guys, Alabama. Nebraska was on the tail end of winning like 3 to 5 national championships in a decade. Kansas State, when Schneider was in his 50s, guys, they were, by the way, the most physical team in America. We played Florida State. They were talented. We played Nebraska. They were beasts. The most physical team we played in 2000, bar none, easy, is that K-State team. I dare people to look at the guys on that team who played in the NFL. It's a ton of them. A ton of those guys played in the league. You got Colorado, you got A&M, you got Texas, Missouri. Big 12 football was the most physical brand of football in America when we won the national championship. So it wasn't like the Big East. Yeah, Miami don't like to talk about that, but Miami almost lost to BC at home in the Big East, which was a trash conference back then. So, I like to give people truth. You know what I'm saying? The truth shall set you free. And opinions matter sometimes, but facts and truth is definitely a better way to look at history.
Yeah, I mean that the teams deserve more respect, but and then I kind of want to move forward a little bit in time and just kind of talk about after that sort of the trend that Oklahoma football took into the Lincoln Riley era, and really the trend that the Big 12 took.
Yep.
I mean that's honestly, I think that is the most telling piece of why you have not had a Big 12 team win a national championship is you go back then at even the Nebraska teams, during the Big Eight, like right before the shift, and then obviously, when the Big 12 formed, when they would go into those championship games, against Florida, play the Miamis, they had already dealt with physical teams prior to that.
Yep.
And it's not that the Big 12 this, past 15 years hasn't had talent, but they haven't had talent where the SEC has been able to put talent on the field. And that's at the defensive line position, out in the secondary, offensive line, some of the running back positions, some of these running backs that you see that, are good guys. Maybe they're not, top dudes in the country, but you go play them. And if you haven't seen a back like that all year, it's a different game. It's a totally different game. So what is your take? And this will obviously, we've buried the lead because everybody wants to know about Lincoln Riley and all this stuff. But what is your take on just the trend of not just OU, because it was everybody in the Big 12, of kind of when that took place, how it happened, and then I think more importantly, and we'll get into BV, but how we're going to get out of it. But really,
Sure.
what happened?
You hit the nail on the head, Barry. We kind of laughed when I believe Missouri leaves first. We're like, they're gonna go there and get their butts kicked. Maybe it's Missouri and A&M. And then you have Colorado. They go west, and then you got Nebraska, and they go to the Big Ten. And what do? You realize, holy crap, we lost a lot of the meat of the conference. Right. Listen, Colorado, even in a down year, you're playing them in Boulder. They've got guys. It's kind of like what you're talking about. They've got a running back who's going to play in the league. They got a couple backers for sure. They're going to have a D lineman. They're going to have a corner. You can't just show up and expect to win the game. Same goes for Missouri. And then of course you lose an A&M and a Nebraska. Those are household names that, provide quality competition. And so in the Big 12, I mean, OU got into a position where they literally had to beef up for Texas. I mean, when you got teams from the likes of Tech and like Oklahoma State or like huge like national weekends, that's problematic. Oklahoma State, and this being from Oklahoma, even when I was there, and by the way, my years we went 3-2. We didn't, we lost in '98. Eric Moore is the quarterback. By the way, we probably win if Eric Moore doesn't get hurt. By the way, he had a terrible career, but stud game his senior year. 99, we win. We beat them 44-7. 2000, we win. We beat them 13-7 or something like that. 2001, we lost. If we win that game, we're playing for the championship again. They kick like 2 50-yard field goals. Nate Hibble seeing ghost all game. There's guys running open all day. They're literally not even rushing the passer. They played a crazy defense. But I think about it, Barry, and when you're number 2 and you're number 3 in the conference are Texas and OSU, and then from there it's just kind of like K-State some years, and the caliber of football being played just drops, and it's no knock on those teams. But in the SEC, when Bama comes back because Saban comes home, and then Georgia is back because Saban comes home and then sends his duplication there. And then, Tennessee takes a dip, but still is the same. Florida's killing it right now. Now you got the Kentuckys, and then now they've got conference money. So conference money comes, and now the Vanderbilts and Kentuckys of the world are getting paid 10 million more per year than even an OU because of their conference affiliation. Well, now the monetization has put those teams in position to, have a lot more clout. right? And so Ole Miss and Mississippi State. So that's a blue blood region. It's the best football region in America. Even when we were the best conference, that was still the best football region. Texas was just keeping all their kids, and we were pulling in a lot of kids from Florida and Georgia. A lot of our guys were from Florida or from Georgia or from Texas and Cali. So I think around the time that exodus happened with the 4 teams that left the Big 12, I also think the Big 12 went through a season in the early 2000s where we were ahead of the game in terms of offense. And you'd go to the SEC and they're still running the power. They're pulling the guard. The receivers are crack backing, and then you're swinging the guard and a tackle out on the edge and trying to get 7 yards and maybe hit an alley. And of course, we're running Mike Leach track on grass. Well, by 2010, 2012, the SEC started to say, well, hold on, there's nothing wrong with scoring points. And you start to see Bama buy into, quick game and RPOs. And you start to see, the Mississippi States starting to buy into a running quarterback and expanding their horizons on just playing power football like they had done for decades. We were left behind again, because now you've got athletes at quarterback and you've got some of the better athletes choosing to play offense, and they're able to out athlete us on both sides of the ball. So it's good to see BVs coming back, because you need, in my opinion, a traditional stud front, whether it's a 34 or it's a 43. I don't think that matters so much anymore. More so that you've got to have a couple studs in the trenches on the defensive side who are unapologetic about being physical and essentially towing that line of like overdoing it. Torrance Marshall told that line every Saturday. By the way, he told the line with us. If I was on offense on a Tuesday and we're going good on good, he's going to do anything he can to intimidate us. And it made us tougher. It made us unafraid to be, play with edge when we played against the opponents, because our defense did that to us. Roy and I were best friends. We went against each other every day in practice. I was a slot receiver. He was essentially the nickel. He played the Willie backer or the Sam backer. They took the Sam out and he would play the Sam position as the nickel, the overhang. And he was my assignment and I was his assignment 80% of the snaps we played. And in practice, I hated his ass. Some days I'd kick his, by the way, some days I would kick his ass. More often than not, he'd get the better hand of me. But that's what you need. That's the ingredients. And I feel like OU went through a season where they were just kind of, the conference was easy enough to just say we can play up to the Texas Tech, or we could play up to Kansas, versus you got to get up for them. You can't just roll into Boulder and think you're going to get out there with a win. You can't just go into College Station, even if they're a down year. If you're playing them in College Station, they're not going to just roll over for you, except for the year we beat the brakes off them 77-0 in the third quarter, and then they had to just go on a knee for the entire
Let's go. Yeah.
Right? Don't ever forget that. So yeah, that mindset shift hurt us 100%.
Yeah, and I don't know if people just really value how much winning the games in your league are so important to a program. So when you have kind of your marquee teams like Oklahoma and Texas, but really primarily Oklahoma in this situation, they made the offensive shift and philosophy, obviously in those 2000s. And then the rest of the league is playing catch up essentially. You get to, the late 2010s. That's when you get, teams leaving for other conferences. And it's almost, you got this product where these teams were so well built to compete with each other in the conference that you never were able to see the level of defensive talent that you would see when you got out of conference. I mean, it just, the teams were kind of built to live in this vacuum of Big 12 football, that when you went outside of it, maybe you can go play a Pac-12 team and be good. But when you play a team, and I'm super big on analytics. I love NBA basketball, and a lot of people dog it, but there are a few things that are just generally true when it comes to national championship level football. And that is, and you kind of said it, I dare anyone to name a national champ of the past, even teams, getting into the game. take the two teams that make it to the game in the playoff era, find one team that doesn't have at least two just absolute nasty, incredible defensive linemen. And usually it's the team that has two of them and then a little bit of depth that ends up winning those games. And it just that fact seems to hold true more often than not. And to deny that that's what you need, especially even in today's football that's so spread out, and you make it harder on guys, like if you don't have that going into a game against Alabama, against Georgia, against LSU, like you're going to have a problem because you won't move the most important part of the game. You won't move the needle on the line of scrimmage.
Bob used to say this thing, Barry. He would say, in football, it really boils down to 5 plays. And I sometimes take it personal. I get upset. I get my feelings. I guess that's a bad. I get petty. I don't get my feelings. I get petty when people say every play matters. Well, every play matters. Let's not kid ourselves there. But in general, there are 5 plays where the Jimmy and the Joe, one-on-one person making or breaking a play will decide the game. And it's crazy because we'd watch film and obviously we're looking at tendencies and right with all that good stuff. Like you said, the analytics. But then we'd watch the game from the lens of watch this one play where Curtis Fagan kicks KU Craver's ass when it's cover 0 and pre-snap. They're showing us they're bringing the safety into the box and they're coming after hype. And at the end of the day, one guy has to make one play and the quarterback has to put the ball where it needs to go. And that makes all the difference. Kurt catches the Z post. That starts the reign where we just start steal the momentum from Nebraska, because prior to that point, Nebraska jumps on us 14-0. And so to hear, you talk about analytics, to hear you talk about, listen, people are going crazy over a Coach BV style of recruiting. I like it because he's getting football players, but at the end of the day, he and Coach Bates know they better get 2 to 3 dudes along that defensive line if they want to compete at the highest level. And I have no concerns that they're very clear and aware and knowledgeable of that, because I know how Coach BV operates. But those 5 plays, and I had never looked at football that way, but I went down, and even high school games. I watched my high school games. We're playing against one of our rivals, and it's like, dude, that one play, I shook the linebacker in the hole. I stiff armed the say, like somebody had to go make a play, and that play turned the tide in the game. And so when you look at football, and you obviously you want to win every play. When I was at OU, every play we were graded a plus, a minus, or a check. A plus, a minus, or a check. And if you were below 80%, you weren't playing. Like that's how it was when I was at OU. I don't know how they do it today, and I don't know how Link did it per se. But when I was at OU, if let's say Barry, we were running a trips to the strong side of the formation, and we're running a dive opposite, and they're playing a zone, and there's only one DB in our vicinity, and the backer's too close to the box, and then the safety's 12 yards off, you better believe I was sprinting my ass off to that safety, because I knew if I didn't touch somebody, I got a minus, even if I wasn't in the play. But it puts you in that kind of position where you're like, every play I have an assignment, and every play I better do it to the caliber of me being a contribution to the team versus a detriment to the team. So, hearing you say that and looking at the Bamas, the LSUs, and like you said, bro, when we were playing for Natties, and you got Tommy and you got Dusty, right? And then you got Austin English, and you got Jeremy Bill, and you got Big McCoy, those championship caliber teams, they always had a dude or 2 or 3 who were ready to come out and kill somebody. Right, Kelly Gregg is probably the best defensive lineman I ever saw play. Him or Tommy?
Really?
Oh my God, Kelly was an animal. And by the way, he was 5'10", 267, and an animal. He was ridiculous. I've never seen a team Tommy was a 220-pound athlete and a 295-pound body man. Like, that's Tommy. Tommy was just an anomaly in the sense that his God-given gifts. Kelly Gregg was a junkyard. yard dog. First things first, Cock Diesel strong. He used his disadvantages to his advantage. He was short-limbed and real stout. So he knew if he got in a position, he couldn't be moved. And he was a freaking football genius. He had an intuition where he could sense where the ball was going and beat his assignment there. And once he got there, he was a wrestler. He puts a finger on you, you're going down. You're going down. Quarterback, running back, fullback, whoever back. And he was a good athlete for who he was, and I mean, heck, he played 8-9 years in the NFL and won a Super Bowl. So, yeah, man, Kelly KG was a dog, and Tommy was a totally different type of dog, and then Gerald McCoy was Tommy and Gerald McCoy had some similarities, just how quick they were off the football, and just Tommy was like the second strongest guy on the team his freshman year.
Holy cow. Yeah,
And
I knew athletically he was there, but even from a strength standpoint.
oh, Tommy was. I don't know how strong McCoy was because I wasn't around the program as much in the 08-09 time, but Tommy, I hosted Tommy on his recruiting visit. Anyway, that's another story for another day. But Tommy came in, bro, in his redshirt season, he was outperforming he didn't redshirt. Right, he started game one of his freshman year, and first play of the season, boom, he gets a sack. So,
yeah, which that then we'll kind of move on to something else. But one of the plays, we talk about just defensively how important that is. Anytime I start thinking about this topic of just how important having two guys on the front, just kind of manning that defense is you go back to that 2018 OU and Alabama game. And there was a lot of hope, right? That, Kyler Murray was just unreal. But when they open offensively, and I can't remember exactly what the blocking scheme was, but Quinnen Williams for like 3 straight plays.
Oh, yeah.
Just whips everybody. Yeah. And I said that they're not winning this game. Because there's nobody for Oklahoma when all of a sudden they're on defense now. Nobody is going to be able to do that for OU to balance that pendulum.
Well, yes, all that is true. And on defense, we played scared. If you remember, they ran the action slant all night. Long. Tua would just show the football. The running back would take a step as if they were going to be running inside zone. And not even, you could see pre-snap, they really weren't going to run it, but the backer has to take the read step, and they just ran the slant behind it all. We never covered it all night.
So this kind of takes me, this fantastic segue. So just the whole, I wouldn't call it the Lincoln Riley fallout, but just the way all of that transpired, what happened to his teams, because I mean, it's not a secret that the 2017 team was arguably his best team that he had. And then I would argue, and I've said this publicly in other places, that their teams declined every year. I mean, and this is respect to the players, but the overall performance on the field, even though the talent rose, when he left this past year, for whatever reasons, that's all personal stuff, but I don't know if you could say that the team was on the upswing coming into this next year.
I would say, you know what? That's an interesting assessment. The reason I say that is because, and God, I'm going to stick a dull needle in my eye saying this, but I think Caleb, he brought a different identity than the identity. Let's digress. In my opinion, Baker was the heartbeat of the 16, 17 teams. And Baker's personality in retrospect probably even outshone Link's. Like Link lucked up and Bake shows up. By the way, Bake shows up before Lincoln shows up. But still, marriage made in heaven. Those two guys get to cooking, and it's amazing. Okay. Mind you, no mention of defense, right? So there's a defensive identity. There isn't one. Our identity is we're going to play track on grass, and we're going to outscore you, and we're going to hope to make a play or two on defense to stem the tide in our favor and outscore you. Like, I mean, would you say, Barry, there's any evidence to suggest against that philosophy? Like, is it pretty clear to you, or maybe you see it different, that OU's philosophy is we're gonna gear up with the Joe Mixons and, I mean, gosh, the bevy of receivers, right? The Hollywoods, the CeeDee Lambs, the tight ends we have rolling through here, and we're going to pretty much score 80 to 90% of the time. And then we're going to play defense in the hopes of either collecting a couple turnovers or a couple of stops. One or two even is enough. And we're going to hope to or plan to outscore you. I don't think there's any evidence, including the Kansases of the world, where we can say that was not our identity or philosophy. Would you agree or disagree?
I would agree, and I would go even a step further and say that even the coaching staffs and their strategy going into games almost mirrored basketball in a way of like, we're going to beat you with threes and let you shoot twos.
That's
like
hilarious.
it was just, that's the vibe that I got watching them. It was, we are, and it almost, the way they played defense only makes sense if that is the case.
Right.
Because for so long it was, I mean, you go back to the Georgia game in 2017, and granted that was Mike, but still it was the same general philosophy of the analytics say that we have Baker, we're going to score this many times we touch the football. If we can just get you to score this many times you touch the football, then we're going to win these games. And I think they recruited with that strategy.
Drives me crazy. They helped me lose hair too, by the way. My head is nice and bald. Lincoln, but it's crazy. Very true story. I'm at Cedar Hill. 2017, my last year as a principal was 2016, 2017. I wanted to coach high school football again. So I moved to Texas to go coach at Cedar Hill. So I coached a season at Cedar Hill High School, phenomenal football tradition, phenomenal head coach. Coach Lynn is an amazing leader of men. Well, we had just recruited, what's the kid's name who transferred to Miami? He was a receiver at OU.
Rambo.
Kenyon Rambo was, so he was at Cedar Hill the year before I got there, or maybe 2 years. It may have been 2 years. I don't remember. But his name, like, I forgot his name. It's Charleston Rambo.
Charleston Rambo. Yeah.
Charleston Rambo. So my year at Cedar Hill, we had a kid named, his name was Bright. He was a slot. He was a sophomore that season, but OU comes, Gundy comes. So I'm teaching, Gundy comes in my classroom. Mack, it was pretty cool to just, like, I'm in my thing, doing my thing in the classroom, and Coach Gundy just pops in my room, and like for 5 minutes, he's kind of like jumping into my lesson. Well, they come back and Link comes and Link is in my room, right? So, obviously alumni, Gundy was like, hey man, this is whatever. So Link comes to my room and Bright's in that class. And so Bright's like, oh my, he's OU starstruck. But it was, for me, I said, that's like a front runner mentality. Like it always felt like to me that Lincoln wanted to be cool, almost in a lens of like he was not cool in his yesteryears or in his younger years. And as the head coach at Oklahoma, it was kind of like popularity for him. And I think that bled into the team's identity. And I only say that because when my cousin left, he stayed in contact with the guys in the 15, 16. So he knew some of the guys who came when Link first took over for Bob. And he just said, like, Link never threw Bob under the bus, but Link always made it a point to kind of take away some of the fabric that Bob had built in the lens of like, I'm more of a player's coach. And like he would tease it where he wanted people to know, like, I'm responsible for this. And to me, that always felt Bush League. To me, that always felt disingenuous. And then of course the way he left, right? You leave and like a thief in the night, the day before, I'm not going to LSU. And then I get a text like an hour or two later, and he had already left at SC. Like clearly, right, that was premeditated. It speaks to character. And the program that I left, the program where you talk about a Mark Clayton and an AD, and you talk about a Gerald McCoy, and you're talking about a Jalen Saunders, and you're talking about, all these guys who played their tails off for the interlocked OU. Keep it 100 with you, bro. As an OC, respect. Quarterback coach, respect. As a head coach, he was never our fabric. That's not the fabric, like maybe some other regimes, but like the Bob Stoops and his coaching tree and the Brent Venables of the like men. We don't lie. We don't manipulate. We're not over here like, you know what I'm saying, trying to people please. Bob's not a people pleaser. By the way, Jerry Schmidt is not a people pleaser.
Yeah.
It's about getting the job done. And as far as I'm concerned, Lincoln always showed a little bit of pussy in that regard. Excuse my candor.
Yeah.
Excuse my candor.
No, so I always had this thought about him as well. That's so, in doing what I do and working a lot with athletes in a one-on-one situation, the relationship you have, let's say, as somebody working with, like in my case, a softball player working with a softball player in their off season on like a few specific details, you have the chance in that relationship to set the dynamic, especially if they're older, either late high school or college age, like be the cool coach to, really get to know them. But when I did stuff like at the high school level with teams, with football teams specifically, my approach changed because the dynamic of everything is now different. If you approach the whole team with this with kind of this lack of discipline, or kind of everything's cool, we're gonna let stuff slide, oh, don't worry about that, that's not a big deal. Once you set that bar, especially when you're dealing with young men, once you set that bar, it's not that they necessarily want to, push past that bar, but once you set it, you've kind of set the room.
Precedent.
And then this is what the behavior is going to be.
Yep.
It's, and you obviously have kids, and I don't, but there's this mindset with, that kids don't want routine, that kids want this kind of free-wielding world and whatnot. Not to say these guys are kids, but I believe athletes and just people in general crave and thrive in discipline. And within that discipline is where you get to have the fun and build the relationships, and do the stuff. And then, in your case, when, when Schmitty is this way towards you, all of a sudden, when he does open up or he does crack a joke with you, or, something, it feels and hits a little different than the guy you just know you have that relationship with from the jump. And you don't, there's not the same respect there. And when the respect's not there, you're not going to hold yourself to a given expectation that is needed to play winning football.
Let me tell you a quick story, bro. You're gonna die laughing. True story, by the way. True story. I remember like it was yesterday. 99. Smith comes in. By the way, I was the first person in the OU program to have to get on Stairmaster. I was late to the very first meeting when Bob Stoops introduced Smitty. Literally, I was sitting in my locker and I walked in at the designated time, and his first moniker was, "If you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time." Boom. Mack, and he didn't know who I was from Adam at that time. And and literally I had to get on the Stairmaster like right after that meeting. True story. But anyway, 99 off season, like 10 guys quit, like 10 guys basically got their scholarships taken away. I mean, it was crazy to see, like, and guys, some of these guys were dudes, but we go to summer workouts and I'm like, man, that off season, like, this is college football. I don't know if I can make it. I'm telling Roy, like, I don't know if I'm coming back, bro. That off season was, man. But I got a position. I think I was the number 2X that year. I played split in behind Gerald Jackson. So in spring, I went from fourth string to second string, which was pretty cool. And they were going to give me some chances, but I was legit like, do I want to come back? So Roy comes back and he calls me. And mind you, I had never experienced a Schmitty style workout. I did an off season with Schmitty, but I had never done a summer work with Schmitty. So Roy calls me like, bro, you about to die. And I'm like, what? He said, D, if you ain't serious, don't come back. So I'm like, my mom's like, well, you better come back. You better come back. So okay, of course I come back. Right. So I come back and I'm just like, okay. So long story short, because I want to get to the point of what you're talking to your point. Long story short, worst summer of my life. It's worst summer of my life for sure. My body had never done what he asked us to do. The amount of discipline and rigor that his expectations were always getting higher. You met the goal that week, and then the next week the goal was some other goal you felt like you could never achieve. Like, and by the way, this isn't hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating. If we ran a 52 on a 400 week 6, he wanted us to run a 49.5. Whatever.
Yep.
Like, I'm just kind of giving you a realistic approach of like his expectations, right?
Sure.
So we go through the summer. By the way, if you're 1 minute on time, you're late. I mean, everything, right? He's really setting a really high bar for us, which again, by the way, is why we kick everybody's ass. Seriously. So it's the end of summer. And Schmitty would do things like, one day we just need to do a call on Schmitty, and I could just tell you some craziness. But Schmitty would do things like we'd run stadiums, and if he there would be days where he'd put a bell out there, and he'd be like, hey man, when you want to stop, like, you're not in trouble, you don't got to come back, I'm not gonna do anything, but you got to ring the bell. And then there was an ice cold Gatorade with an umbrella, so there'd be like an umbrella to keep the sun directly off of it. It would come ice cold from inside, and it would be under this umbrella. And so we're running, and the moment you want to quit, you get to quit, and you got to ring the bell and drink the Gatorade, right? So like these are the kind of mind trips he's doing to us all the time. By the way, I'm not going to say no names. I saw a couple people drink the Gatorade a couple times. I never did. So it gets to this is a true story, bro. We get to the end of summer, and it's like week 8. And I don't know if you read what I said in the Rivals deal, but by the time you get to week 7, you're kind of mentally strong enough to whatever he throws at you, you just got to mentally be like, screw it, we're going to kill it. You're in great shape. You kill it, right? Like it hurts, but you're going to kill it.
Yeah.
So we're in week 8 now, and it's kind of like, okay, what is he going to throw at us? And we're kind of like, screw it, whatever it is, we're gonna beat the brakes off of it. Well, Schmitty comes out and he's like, hey guys, grab a popsicle. And we're all looking at each other like, what? He's like,
oh man,
grab a popsicle. We're like, nah, hell nah. Like somebody like Big Al, we had a guy named Al Basinger. He's like, nah, man, you gonna have me throwing up grapefruit juice. He whatever he says. And Schmitty's like, no, get a popsicle. And then these buses pull up, and we're like, what in the hell is going on? And long story short, man, that day we're preparing to run a whatever he's throwing at us that day. They gave us popsicles and took us on a bus to the water park. And it meant everything in the world to us. Like, here we are, we're shaking in our boots to even have an opportunity to just participate in chillaxing. We didn't,
yeah.
And he didn't tell us. He was kind of like, go ahead and get a popsicle. We're like, nah, I ain't getting no popsicle, bro. You trying to have me throwing up. End of the day, he was 100%, setting us up, and then the coaches come, and so we all get on the buses, and I forgot what the name of the water park is right there off 35 in Oklahoma City, but they take us to this water park, and the whole day was just to have fun. But to your point, because he set that bar so high, and because the standard was so like, we were men, like everything was, I'm going to treat you like a man, which means you need to act like a man, which means you need to be a man. Like, that was just the vernacular in the conversations we had. We didn't do the nonsense. No one dared mess around and think, oh, Schmitty's playing. I never saw Schmitty play, by the way. Like, Schmitty would come give you love and say, good job, big dog. Now get ready for kickoff if you scored a touchdown. If I scored a touchdown, Schmitty would come, give me the smelling sauce, hug me up. Good job, big dog. All right, you're going to kick off team. Get ready to go. Like, damn, bro, can I? Usually, Coach Spurrier, if I score a touchdown, he'll let me sit that one out and put somebody in. But Schmitty... Smitty is like, nah, man, get on the line. So, that I am excited for that to be back, because those are the intangibles that make all the difference.
I hope you guys enjoyed the very first episode of the Barry and Mack Show. Please tune in this Wednesday for part 2. In the meantime, make sure that you go like, rate, and review. You should be able by now to find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, basically anywhere and everywhere that you can get podcasts. It helps us out so much. The more you can go comment, rate, review, subscribe, all of the podcast things that one can do, helps more people find us so we can grow this conversation with Sooner Nation. Did not mean to rhyme right there. But it means the world to us that you guys are listening, especially this far, and are supporting the podcast. Thank you so much. We cannot wait to see you guys for part 2 and all of the other episodes down the road. Have a good one. See you soon.